Hello, everybody. Good evening. Nice to see you all. So this is the trip of the three gems, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Of the three jewels, my favorite jewel is the Sangha. And I think that the significance of the Sangha is from my perspective, generally not appreciated enough in this postmodern era age. So I hope I'm going to try and convey how important I think it is and what its extraordinary and most precious value actually is. So, as I'm fond of saying, as I'm fond of repeating, when the Buddha was asked the question, is association with like-minded people a part of the holy life? Apparently his answer was, association with like-minded people is the whole of the holy life. And I remember the first time I heard that, it truly shocked me. Because we have to think that this is the enlightened one. It's the enlightened one after all. The one who knows what he's talking about when it comes to spiritual illumination. And so the enlightened one himself said that to live the holy life, the association with like-minded people is the most important aspect of the most important part of the spiritual life. And I think the implications in that statement are very profound and potentially life-changing if you really understand what it means. So why this is important is because it's through our human relationships that we share values with other people. Values are similar beliefs about what's important in life. And we share different values with different people that we share our life with. With our parents, we share certain values. With our family, we share certain values. With our co-workers, we share different values that relate to the work that we're doing together. If we play sports, we'll share different values with the people we play sports with. All the configurations of different collectives in our life. The nature of those collectives is based upon shared values, shared beliefs, shared ethics, shared metaphysics, shared philosophical beliefs, shared outlooks, shared aspirations, but shared worldviews. And appreciating what that actually means about the human experience, and more so what it means about spiritual liberation, is very interesting and very compelling and very challenging for most people. So if you want to see what you are, if you want to do the spiritual part of, if you want to do the spiritual work to be able to to try to gain a more objective look at your own life and the way you're living it and what it means, you have to look at the people with whom you choose to share your life with. Who do you spend the most time with, and why do you spend the most time with those people? Who is it that you love more than anybody else? Who are your closest friends? Who are you most intimate with? And this goes, look across the whole spectrum of interrelatedness in your life. And then look very deeply into the nature of what are the kind of values that I'm sharing with these different individuals in my life. What are those values that I'm sharing with them? Often we share values that we're not even conscious of with other people. It's something that we have to, most of us have to think about, and we have to inquire and investigate the nature of what our relationships are actually based upon with other people. So the reason that the Sangha is so important, and the reason why I believe that the Buddha said that the relationships we have with other people that we walk the path with are the most important in our life, is because in the relationship with people in a Sangha, which means your spiritual brothers and sisters, are supposed to be all of those individuals with whom the only reason that you're in a relationship with them is because you share your shared value is unconditional enlightenment and illumination. So if the shared value you have with the people that you're closest to in your life is absolute freedom and perfect enlightenment, that's going to shape the nature of those relationships in a way that is very, very unique, very, very precious, very, very special, and very, very important. You want to think about what that means. The context for the spiritual relationship with your spiritual brother and spiritual sister is absolutely radical and absolutely unique compared to any other relationship you have in your life. Because what you're sharing at the level of values is the highest human aspiration that there is. The quest for the awakening to enlightened awareness is the highest spiritual aspiration that exists in this world. And it's a very idealistic one. Very idealistic. It's where we strive to realize and attain the highest human spiritual potentials that exist. At least that becomes the individual and collective shared aspiration. So when my relationship with you and your relationship with me is based upon this shared aspiration for perfect and total enlightenment and illumination, that's going to make the nature of that relationship very special indeed. Because it means all of our engagements with each other, both small and large, are going to be based upon this shared aspiration to realize the highest individually and collectively. And this becomes very, very interesting and meaningful when we look at this whole notion of spiritual development in a developmental context, which means we're aspiring for, in this very rarefied idealistic context, we're aspiring for the highest virtues. And my relationship with you is based upon our individual and collective aspiration to share the highest virtues together. That makes the way we relate to each other and what happens within the nature of that relationship very spiritually significant. If you want to know how if you want to understand what the nature of enlightenment looks like, you have to look at the nature of the relationships that so-called enlightened people have with their closest friends and brothers and sisters and companions on the path. What's the nature of those relationships? What do they look like? What do they feel like? Do they express the highest virtues as we, to the best of our ability, as we understand them? And the relationships we have with those people who we're sharing the path with becomes a mirror in which we can see how we're doing. We get to see how we're doing, how are we progressing? Are we progressing? Or are we stagnating? Or are we developing in the most beautiful way? Or are we continuing to develop beautifully? If when you share this very precious value of the awakening to enlightened awareness with another human being, with other human beings, if it's real and if it's deep and if it's sincere, if you're sincere and if that individual is sincere and you really mean it with all of your heart, it means all that you really want for them is their own perfect liberation without conditions. And all they want for you is your own perfect liberation without conditions. And if that's all you really want for those people that you love the most and who care the most for, and what they care the most for from you, it's a very special context. It's very unique. As I was saying earlier, we are in relationships with other people for all different kinds of reasons. More often than not, they're very self-serving and functional. But this kind of spiritual relationship can become the context in which the highest virtues are expressed and demonstrated in the way we relate to each other and relate to those we care about the most. And because we're embracing these highest virtues, our own spiritual integrity is going to be tested in these relationships in a way that it won't be in other relationships in our life. Because, for example, in a context of such idealism, certain virtues are taken for granted. For example, honesty. In such a rarefied spiritual context, it would be taken for granted that I would always be expressing myself honestly and earnestly. There would be an expectation of integrity in the way I was engaging with you and the way you were engaging with me. That would be a ground level expectation. Similarly, with all kinds of virtues like generosity, compassion, selflessness, high-mindedness. High-mindedness, not only thinking big thoughts and talking about big thoughts, but acting inspired by big thoughts with each other. So in a saga that is alive with spiritual enlightenment that's being shared and lived with profound intention and commitment, we expect the best and the most from each other, which creates a little bit of which creates an atmosphere of what I call of existential tension or spiritual tension. Because there's an expectation, a loving, deeply loving expectation of the highest from each other. I expect the best and the highest from you, and you return the favor by expecting the highest and the best from me. And that's one of the ways we express our love for each other. We not only forgive each other for our imperfections, which are unavoidable and inescapable. So we learn how to forgive, as we learn to forgive ourselves for our imperfections, we learn how to forgive each other for our imperfections. We also simultaneously expect the highest from each other without excuses. And we want the highest from each other. And if this becomes part of the shared spiritual and metaphysically vibrant context, it begins to feel like one is swimming in an ocean of pure motivation, which is very rare and very precious in human life. So entering into a spiritual community context or a Sangha context where the Dharma is being lived earnestly, sincerely, with deep commitment and absolute investment. The atmosphere should feel very rarefied, like almost like one's entering into a river of pure motivation, surrounded by truly awakened bodhisattvas who are walking the talk of the Dharma in the way that they live their lives, in the way that they engage with each other. And it's the level of sincerity that I'm speaking about, which is the most important part of all this. There's a relationship between sincerity and non-duality, which means, from my point of view, in this context, if you're sincere, it means you really mean it. It means you're not just saying it, you're not just talking about it, but it means you actually mean it with all your heart, with the best of your intentions. You really mean what you're saying, and you become an expression of the very thing that you're saying and that you mean. So you become an expression of your own sincerity. And when you can walk your talk like that in the context of with other people that are walking the talk in the same way, the meaning of non-duality becomes expressed in this atmosphere of realness. It's an atmosphere where, I'm speaking very idealistically, remember, but nevertheless, it's an atmosphere where everything becomes very real, very authentic, where it's lacking in pretense and lacking in, therefore, duality. And such a spiritually vibrant, vibrating spiritual context, human context, is utterly intoxicating. And the aspiration for purity is like a divine virus, because when we let go of our fear of pure motivation and of non-duality, when we let go of our fear of purity and non-duality, and actually allow ourselves to swim in it and to experience it and to allow ourselves to let go into it, we can become addicted to it ourselves. Even though it takes a lot of courage at the beginning, it takes a lot of moral conviction and moral strength to let go of duality and falsehood. But once you get the hang of it, once you get used to it, it becomes unbearable to live in any other way. And so the significance of Sangha is that the intersubjective context of relatedness becomes the canvas upon which the spiritual life is enacted. And I think for most of us, it's the true test of our sincerity and of our authenticity and of our spiritual commitment. A lot of people have very, from my perspective, outdated opinions of going it that living the spiritual life means going it alone. And of course, there are rare historically recognized exemplars of profound realization of individuals who've gone it alone and definitely reached the yonder shore and beyond that, and are historically renowned for that. But I found in my life that it's much more challenging to do this with other people, for many of the reasons that I've been trying to elucidate here in this talk, because when we're alone, we can fool ourselves about so many things. Self-deception is very easy. But if you're around other sincere practitioners who love you and who see you clearly and want you to bloom like a flower, they won't let you lie to yourself and they won't let you deceive yourself. And such an atmosphere becomes a sacred space, a sacred environment, where truth becomes not something we're not something we're really aspiring to, but it's something that we actually feeling in our nerves. So one of the insights that I speak a lot about over the last 2 years or so is this my recognition that consciousness, whatever that is, the mystery of consciousness, whatever that is, the mystery of subjectivity or interiority or sentience, always delights in its own self-recognition. So the mystery of consciousness, whatever that is, always delights in its own self-recognition. And as we awaken to enlightened awareness, we realize or we recognize that consciousness is not a personal event. Consciousness is not a personal experience. Consciousness is not a personal happening. It's a radically impersonal, vastly inconceivable process that seems to be present at all times, in all places, through all circumstances. But it's definitely not a personal experience. That's definitely not merely a personal experience. So when a collective of awakened and awakening individuals who are to a reasonable degree surrendered to the mystery that lies beyond the mind, and small self, the the experience of consciousness, the sense of consciousness, the knowing of consciousness, the ebb and flow of the momentum of consciousness can be felt in deeper and more profound ways than we can ordinarily cognize it when we're simply on our own. When you share that kind of unrestricted openness and trust with other human beings, it opens up a capacity for sensing the flow of consciousness and the momentum of consciousness, subtle momentum of consciousness, in ways that are metaphysically intoxicating, but very meaningful, because that's when there's the sense that we're all part of a process that's bigger, and it's bigger than us individually and always transcends our unique individuality, begins to be recognized and directly experienced in a way that's very profound and very inspiring and very liberating and very compelling. That's when we that's when we begin to get to feel directly this infinite ocean that exists between all of us. And none of us are alone. We never were, and that it's the mysteries moving us. We're not really doing very much. We think we're doing a lot, but we're not really doing anything. And so when we're in this collective context where there's so much openness to the mystery of the unknown nature of spirit itself, its mysterious currents begin to be felt. And there's in this kind of experience, there's the intimations of a cosmic intelligence that's at work. It's always at work. It's doing all the doing. That the body, and that our bodies and minds and personalities are merely just coming along for the ride, but they're not really doing anything. They're just kind of like puppets. So when these kinds of things are felt in a collective in a collective context, the power of enlightened awareness begins to be revealed in ways that are supremely not only just intoxicating, but inspiring and compelling. It's almost like together, if we live the spiritual life in earnest, together, we can open up to the mystery of the universe in ways that we rarely can do on our own. And from the perspective of the evolutionary orientation to liberation or to moksha or to enlightenment, the developmental approach, we realize, it becomes apparent to us in this context, that together we can work very hard to catalyze and to play our part individually and collectively in catalyzing the movement of consciousness to higher and deeper levels of its own potential. And that's the most exciting part of all this, is when we can begin to literally bear witness to our own individual and collective capacity to play a significant role in the evolution and emergence of more complex consciousness itself. What seems to happen is that as we live the Dharma with more precision, more care, more commitment, more faith, more devotion, more sincerity, individually and together, the very fabric of the interior of the universe begins to reveal itself, and we begin to see that if we live according to these self-revealing spiritual laws that I was speaking about when I was describing the Dharma 2 weeks ago, help make clear to us exactly what we have to do and how we have to do it in order to catalyze this vertical ascension of consciousness itself within us and between us. And that's when at least from my perspective, that's when living the spiritual life is experienced at its highest level of meaning, purpose, and virtue. Is that when you can experience at the deepest metaphysical level within your own self that the way you're living your life, the way you're living the Dharma, and how you're conducting yourself and expressing yourself, take responsibility for yourself and all of your karmas, is literally catalyzing evolution at the most subtle level of existence, which is consciousness itself. It bestows enormous meaning, inherent and very religiously inspired sense of meaning and purpose and presence in your human existence. So, in the way that I think about all this now, to me, being alone without a Sangha, without spiritual brothers and sisters, spiritual partners, without a spiritual family in which to live this life, I would feel utterly lost. And I wouldn't know which foot to put in front of my other one. I might understand all the different kinds of spiritual technologies and spiritual techniques and spiritual postures that I need to assume in order to walk the path. But I would feel so alone and isolated. To me, spiritual fraternity or spiritual brotherhood and sisterhood is like more important than food and drink. In order to feel, for me, in order to feel grounded and safe and in the right place at the right time for the right reasons, doing the right thing. It creates a sense of vast and personal, religiously significant meaning and context. Often I see people from the awakened perspective that I'm describing. I often see people seemingly swimming in the ocean of samsara, lost at sea, so to speak, lost and alone without even knowing that they're lost and alone, not even aware of what's possible. When you wake up and when you find your true family, how life can change so much. I remember hearing once when I was working on my magazine with some of my students, we were interviewing a Buddhist scholar about the Buddha, and he said the Buddha was a very tough taskmaster. And he told the story, I don't know if this is real or not, but he said that when he was nearing his death, some of his closest monks were saying that it'll be great when the old man is dead because then we can sleep in. It'll be great when the old man is dead because then we can sleep in. So without having each other to compel us to live a life of self-discipline and self-focus, it's very difficult to know how to do this the right way. We've all heard the phrase, living a spiritual life is like walking on the razor's edge. And so it's very difficult to walk the razor's edge, or to be so awake that to be so awake that in that awakeness we realize that if we want to live the spiritual life in earnest, we need to walk on the razor's edge. It's very easy to forget that. Most people do. Oh yeah, the razor's edge. I heard about that. As a matter of fact, there was one time when I was actually in touch with the razor's edge. So in order to keep us on the razor's edge, often we need each other to help us to stay awake in that way. Most people do. And it's nobody's fault. That's just the way we are. That's just the human nature. And if you find yourself associating with and living with people, engaging with others who are living the spiritual life with greater zeal, greater commitment, and greater intensity than you are, you'll get a clearer sense of how much farther there is for you to go. And at the same time, if you're living the spiritual life with great zeal and intensity and are experiencing the unique metaphysical results of living the spiritual life with that kind of zeal and intensity, you start to feel how you're affecting other people for the better. You start to see how living the spiritual life, a life of virtue and the highest aspirations, actually has effects on other people in very profound ways. So it's good to be around people who are doing better than we are. The ego's very lazy. The ego always wants to go back to sleep and roll over, no? But if your spiritual brother, spiritual sister has gotten up 2 hours early, it won't be so easy. And, understanding the significance of striving for consciousness, what it means to strive to become more conscious, to aspire and strive to become more conscious is part of when it becomes part of a collective shared aspiration, it makes it easier for everyone involved to go the extra mile, to make the extra effort, to stay on that razor's edge. When people are on their own, they fall in and out of awakened awareness too easily. If you find that if you're with another person who's awake and you have fallen back asleep for some reason, their awakeness will wake you up. So, in short, we need each other to do this. Most of us do. There are, of course, extraordinary exemplars who are exceptions to the rule, but the exceptions are not the rule. I think that consciousness, as I understand it anyway, evolves more profoundly through a we than through a me. And it feels so good to come home to the other and to the others. It feels so good to come home. Home is that place and that space where we feel most comfortable. Wherever you feel more comfortable than in any other place, in any other space, where do you feel most at home is the intersubjective metaphysical world space that I'm talking about. But for most people feel most at home with their biological family, because that's the part of their self that they're most identified with as self. But if you've awakened to enlightened awareness, and if you found your true self, You won't feel most at home with your biological family. You'll feel most at home with your spiritual family. And your spiritual family has nothing to do with blood relationships. It has nothing to do with your ethnocentric identity. It has to do with your metaphysical identity. So when you're sharing the deepest truth of your metaphysical identity that you've realized, and that others have realized together, then it's only with those who've had the same level of realization, the same level of commitment to that realization. It's in that context alone that you'll feel the most home. The most home means the most at ease, the most comfortable, the most fully aligned space and place, the most inherently enlightened intersubjective world space domain, the most spiritually enlightened inner world space. You feel the greatest spiritual comfort and sense of safety and inner freedom and joy. It's a very rarefied space. It's a very sacred space. It's very precious. And what makes it so sacred and so precious and so rarefied is that if the Dharma is being practiced in earnest and for real with the greatest sincerity that I've been describing, it's a place where the ego is not permitted to enter. When the Dharma is being lived for real at the highest level, it gives rise to an egoless, subjective, and ultimately intersubjective world space. And that egoless, intersubjective world space becomes the experience of heaven. That's what the experience of heaven is actually all about. Heaven doesn't exist in some other physical space. It exists in this space. When the small self, when the individual and culturally conditioned small self is taking a vacation, we find ourselves in a heavenly realm. And the intoxication of that space is impossible to describe. That's where we experience the greatest happiness imaginable. We're simply being ourselves, alone and together is more than enough. It's unbearably more than enough. In that space of vibration of inherent truth and inherent unimaginable freedom, and the presence of perfection become completely overwhelming. In my understanding, that's the goalpost. That's the target. And if we can bring together this kind of highest metaphysical aspiration with our emerging understanding of this developmental part of spiritual development, we'll be existing in a heaven realm that's going somewhere new. It's a heaven realm that's on a journey of becoming. And that beautiful space, the more we can let go individually, collectively, the more that heaven realm can become manifest and take form and actually become manifest. So this whole idea of Sangha, or spiritual brotherhood and spiritual sisterhood, provides the context in which these highest spiritual attainments, individual and collective, can actually come into being, where they can be aspired for, discussed, understood, analyzed, scrutinized, and slowly but surely attained by one, and then by another, and by another, and more and more. And the more individuals that can attain this height of realization, the more these extraordinary heights of spiritual realization literally become manifest in this miserable world. But as I've been saying since I started talking, we need each other to do this. You can't do this on your own. But it requires an enormous level of commitment and sincerity and seriousness and a vision of the possible, a spiritually awakened vision of the possible. And what you have to be able to imagine is your own perfectly purified self in the future. Perfection is unattainable in the present moment, so don't worry about it. But you need to be able to envision your perfectly purified self in all its unrestrained magnificence, abiding in the context of so many others, vibrating and pulsating with the same luminescent transparency and unimaginable liberation and joy. So we want to understand that the Sangha becomes a literal, a physical, real physical and metaphysical container for this, for the high, to embrace and to embody and to liberate and to manifest the heights of spiritual realization, the heights of spiritual transformation for the whole universe. Why are we all together? Because we want the whole universe to become enlightened through us. That's all. That's all. So it's quite a lofty ambition, but try to reach deeply inside yourself to truly understand the reasons why you'd actually want to come together with other people in such a extraordinary commitment. It's not really for you. It's not for each other. It's for the whole universe. So we can enact these metaphysical leaps of consciousness, leaps of becoming. And in order to do that, we have to shed our old identity like a snake sheds its skin and become these luminescent bodhisattvas for real. Nobody can do that on their own. Very few people can anyway. Remember, everybody, that the world does not exist outside you. The world exists within our own minds. So be very careful about the way that you're thinking about your own identity, about the world that we're living in, that you're living in, about the meaning and purpose of this episode of embodied existence, about this world space. Pay attention to what you're thinking about all this. Because everything that I've been describing, as outlandish as it sounds, is available and is attainable and is realizable if enough of us want it badly enough. So living the spiritual life, living the holy life is, that's why to live the spiritual life and live the holy life, this is why, at least in my understanding, the Buddha said that association with like-minded people is the whole of the holy life. And to repeat, he didn't say living association with like-minded people is a part of the holy life, which would have been a reasonable answer. He said it's the whole of the holy life. So I would boldly encourage all of you to reflect on what does that mean? Why did he say that association with like-minded people is the whole of the holy life? It doesn't leave much room for for any other possibility than what's most obvious. So I'm almost finished. So in light of this talk, it's helpful to think about liberation, the meaning and the possibility of your own liberation and your relationships. Think about these things together. It'll help you. Yes, ultimately liberation, perfect liberation, profound liberation is about the awakening to consciousness itself. Of course. But I dare to say it's equally about the nature of your relationships, what they're based on, what they're truly based on, what they're honestly based on. All the places that we are attached. If you're deadly if you're deadly serious about this, your soul wants to be so focused on the absolute nature of liberation itself that your lesser emotional attachments begin to fade into the distance. I'm not speaking about lacking compassion and lacking affection and lacking commitment to people that you care about and love. It's nothing to do with that. I'm speaking about your souls. What is your soul attached to? And where your soul what your soul is attached to has nothing to do with whatever your ego and mind have to say about it. So I would encourage everybody to disregard whatever your ego and mind have to say about this. Just look into how your soul feels for the truth. So the Sangha becomes this vast container in which the spiritual life can be lived at its highest level in a very unique way in which it's very difficult to do outside that context. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's pretty close to it. And also keep in mind, this is not news to any of you, that whenever two or more people come together and find that they love and prioritize the significance of non-dual spirit more than anything else, friends and family and acquaintances and culture at large will see this as a threat. It's something incomprehensible. Because most people can't see, don't understand the nature of absolute non-dual spirit. But if you see it, and other spiritual brothers and sisters see it, but your friends and your family don't, they will start to worry about you and they'll get concerned. When I first arrived in India in 1984, I went to Rishikesh, which was one of my first destinations, and I went to the Shivananda ashram, which was one of the most famous ashrams in Rishikesh. And I went to the satsang hall, and there was a small man, who was a small Swami, who in later years became one of my mentors, the great Swami Krishnananda. And was giving a talk. I don't remember what he talked about, but I remember at the end of the talk, I'll never forget it, he said, there's a sound There's a drone. Can you hear the sound of the drone? It's the sound. The sound. It's coming from God. Can you hear it? Can you hear it? Can you hear it? He said it's saying, come together, come together, come together. In unity there is strength. Come together. Can you all hear it? Can you hear it? Can you hear it? And I remember this marvelous teaching coming from this beautiful awakened soul entered into my heart in a way that I was simply unprepared for. I was utterly intoxicated. I could barely stand up and walk. I stumbled down to the river, the Ganga. It took me several hours to recover, and I always felt that hearing this extraordinary, realized Swami speak about the unity of awakened, the unity and power of awakened consciousness, uh, impregnated my soul with this vision of intersubjective non-duality. It's just a guess, but it seems to be true. But please think about all these things. Please think about them seriously and sincerely, and see how most of us, for better and for worse, see how most of us are, for better and for worse, utterly dependent on each other. For knowing, for understanding, for clarity, for confidence, for security, and for liberation. It's for better and for worse, I said, remember. They're both true. So see both sides of this coin, but since it's true that we are very dependent on each other to get any sense of what's real and what's important, you begin to appreciate how important it is to associate with those people with whom you can share the deepest part of yourself with. Not just once a year, but every day. When you can do this with other people, you really get a sense of what it means for the entire human world space to awaken to its higher potentials. Not that it can or it will anytime soon. But you can, in this context, you can get overwhelmed with the inspiration that it could happen, that it wants to happen. Doesn't mean that it will. Doesn't even mean that it could. But you start to have feelings that inspire you to want desperately for all of us to wake up. And that's what's important. Very good. I hope you guys found this helpful. I'm speaking from my heart, and these are all things that I actually feel very strongly about. Often when I'm giving talks like this, it's good not to take everything too literally, but to try to get a sense of this the spirit of where this is coming from in me.